are at British Museum, and we have Dr. Jay Smith with us. Jay has been traveling from US to Ethiopia. And then he spent a Sunday with us at Speaker's Corner.
Yesterday.
Yes.
That's why our voice is a little hoarse today.
And we are at the British Museum to look at the Islamic influence to the Western world. How was that, Jay?
Well, it was fascinating, Hatun. You told me about it, and that's the first time I've seen it. So we walked through it. But you first showed me, went through an era of the Byzantine era.
Yeah.
And you looked at, we're going to bring something up that you noticed right away, the Crusades. And they have it nice, big, and you can see, we'll just put the image up right here, right now.
Yeah, before we get to that one, can you just tell me, as you went into the British Museum, where you look at the Islamic influence to the Western world, can you just tell me a little bit about the Christian room in British Museum, Jay?
It doesn't exist, Hatun. There is
How
no
come,
such thing
Jay?
as a Christian room. There is no such thing as a Hindu room. There's no such thing as a Buddhist room. There's only an Islamic room, and not just one, two rooms that are dedicated to Islam.
Even though British Museum didn't bother to give room to the Christian faith, still there are lots of artifacts in the British Museum where it helps us as a Christian to be more confident in our faith. There are lots of rooms you can go and confirm the authenticity and reliability of the Bible, from Genesis account to even the Persian account.
You do a tour of this, don't you?
We do a British Museum tour on the focus of the Bible, and then also we go to the British Library.
Period, looking at the Babylonian period, looking at the Persian period, going back to the patriarchal period. You're showing artifact after artifact, which are a treasure trove here in this museum that supports names, dates, places, and events in the Bible.
Yes.
So if you want to see that, if you want to be encouraged, come to Hatun and let her take you on that tour.
So even though they didn't give us room, but still Christian history is in the British Museum. Please don't get upset. But as we enter the two rooms British Museum gives to the Islam, sadly we were not able to go to the second room because they are doing some changings. But we were able to spend little bit time in the first room.
Yeah.
Just give me your first impression first, and then we just go through a couple of things which we think it's helpful for us to rethink about.
Yeah, I think when you first walk into the Islamic room, you're assuming that there's going to be you assume that it's going to do all on the religion itself, and what it tends to be is they make claim after claim after claim that that's a religion of
peace,
great architecture. You see that there, a religion of great scientific endeavor, and as you say, a religion of peace. And to me, it's a rather odd that they would even have that premise. But again, I think this is for political correctness. They need to say that. What I'd like to do is zero in on some of the artifacts to show that there are some difficulties that they didn't bring up. And then one of the problem is that when we think of Islam, we only have one narrative, don't we?
Yep.
And that's
the traditional account,
what they call the classical account. And it's what I brought up when you were brought up with. The very same account that you were brought up with in Turkey is the same account that we're brought up with here in Britain and the United States. There has only ever been one account. And the British Museum has tied into that account. Now, it's not through political correctness. I think this is just the only account they know. No one has asked any critical questions as to whether or not what Muslims have shown us, what Muslims have claimed, is actually fact. A number of years ago, they had science, Islamic science, in the Scientific Museum.
No.
And did you ever go through that?
No.
It was an entire wing dedicated to science, and I was appalled at the amateurness of
Did
that.
they show about the embryo stuff?
Embryological cycle. They showed a guy who jumped off a tower with some feathers and said he was the first man that invented flight. Things as idiotic as that. But in some ways, the British Museum is not going to that extent. They are making some mistakes, but they're taking on this classical account. And they're not at all being critical, which to me is what a museum should do. There should be some type
Give
of
us the
critical analysis.
historical side of the things.
Do these events, did they happen in that period, at that time, and at that place? That's a perfectly legitimate historical question to ask. It's been asked to the Bible. Why is it not asked to the Quran? So let's give some examples. Let's just go through a few of them.
So let's start with the coins.
Start with the coins.
I was amazed with the images and the writings and the dates of the coins. Can you just unpack for us what you have observed and what we conclude?
Well, let's take a look, and we're going to show all the coins on this picture here. So look at the back row where their silver coins are in the back row. The two on the left are Sassanid. These are Zoroastrian coins, so they're not really our interest because they are much too early. This is prior to the time of Islam. And the two that are in the middle then, again, are not really of interest to us because they are also Sassanid. But the one on the far right at the top there, and the silver one at the far right, that is of interest to us because that is from the 8th century. And it has the Shahada on it. Around 705 is when it's dated. And when you look at it carefully, you'll notice the Shahada that is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. But that would not be a surprise.
So 705 is
Al-Wali.
too late.
It's too late. Well, it's not.
If you think about Islam, revelation of the Quran according to the Islamic tradition finished in 630. By that time, they're supposed to put together all of their basic beliefs.
Yeah.
705 is too late.
Basic beliefs should be in place by 632, by the time Muhammad
latest.
dies. Okay? And I'm talking about all beliefs. Because everything we know, all the beliefs are centered back to Muhammad.
Yep.
So let's use that line as 632. Now let's go to those golden coins on the left. When you come up here, look at those two golden coins. Those are Byzantine drachmas. That's a Byzantine drachma. If you look carefully, you will see in the middle, on the front side of the coin, is the Byzantine emperor with two retainers on either side.
Yep.
And if you look in his hand, you can see he has an orb, and there's a cross at the top of the orb. That is a Byzantine cross. On the back side, the coin next to it is the back side of that same coin, is the Byzantine cross. It's very clear. You can see it has the pedestal with the centerpiece and the cross piece.
We try to do our best to take the pictures as well as we can. So hopefully the images and description Jay is giving is helpful to us.
Now, I want to show you now two new coins. These are the two coins that were introduced in 661 by the Umayyad dynasty, the Sufyani family. Take a look. It's almost exactly like the drachma. Those are known as the dirham, the Sufyani dirham. And when you look at it, you notice it has the images still on.
Their date is 661.
They're dated 661.
Okay.
And they have an image. This time, instead of the emperor, it's the caliph. You can see the turban on his head.
Yep.
And you notice he has an orb in his hand, but there's no cross on the orb. The cross has been taken off. On the back side, you will still see the pedestal for the Byzantine cross. You will see the pole, but you won't see a cross piece. The cross piece taken off.
So as the time went on, suddenly it's just being transformed.
There's a reason for this.
Because pictures are not okay in Islam?
Well, hold on a minute. That's the big problem I'm having. I thought if these are Islamic, if these are Muslims, how can they have a picture of the caliph? That's anathema, isn't it? Because Muhammad is very clear that no images are permitted because that's idolatry. So what are these images doing on that coin?
Also because heavenly beings, angels, do not come to the houses if there are pictures.
That's right. And so that's why from almost all Islamic art is nothing but calligraphy. And that's why they're so good at calligraphy, and that's why calligraphy is so important. Now, can you notice, though, why is it that they do this? And the reason is very simple. If you're trading with the Byzantines, you want to make sure you have a coin that everybody recognizes. So you take the same coin that the Byzantines
what they were using.
The same coin, the drachma.
Yep.
Call it the dirham and put your own image, because this also then says who you are. And remember, they didn't have radio or television or newspapers to announce we're now the new rulers. The only way they could do that is by using coins. And the coins go to everybody's hand, and now the people see who are the new rulers. But these rulers do not live in Mecca. They do not live in Medina. They live in Damascus. They're 1,200 miles further north. Their biggest competition are the Byzantines. So these are the dirham that replaced the drachmas, so they can be traded back and forth. But because of the fact that they are not Christians, in fact they're against Christianity, what do? They take off the cross piece.
Yeah.
They take off the cross piece. They keep as much as they can, and then they take out the emperor and put their own face in there. Now let's go to the next two coins next to it, because this is now 690s. In the 690s, we now have Abdul Malik. He comes to power in 685, right?
Yeah.
And in 685, he introduces this coin here, and it's a picture of himself. Again, what are coins? What are pictures of people? What are pictures of anybody doing on a coin as late as 690s or 685?
I guess they are just trying to put their identity forward.
But
who we are, what we are going to get.
Obviously, they weren't Muslims, then, were they?
No comments on that.
Well, I'm going to comment on it. It's obviously they're not Muslim. You can't have a Muslim putting his image on a coin, regardless of who he is.
They're just trying to put their theology together, because when we look at the Sahih Bukhari, by 870, he lived up way after Abdul Malik. Therefore, maybe Abdul Malik didn't know that Muhammad forbid the pictures until Sahih Bukhari put
he
it
lives
together.
200 years later.
Yeah.
You're right, yeah. And it looks like that's where that theology is introduced. I would suggest it is actually introduced with Abdul Malik. Why do I know that? Take a look at the next coins. But before we do that, notice you have the Byzantine cross, just the pole though, without the cross piece.
Yeah.
On the backside, the verso, what they call the verso reverse. Now, go to the next two coins on the right, and the two golden coins. These are also introduced at the time of Abdul Malik. And what are the dates on those?
Are they the
686, 687, right? Or
696.
696, 699.
Yeah.
So Abdul Malik has been in power because he came in power 685 and he rules till 705.
That's the Abdul Malik appears with his sword.
He pulls his sword. He now throws out that coin and he introduces brand new coins, these new golden ones here. And those all have only Arabic script. So he is the one that introduces the idea that there's no iconoclasm. He is the one that introduces the idea that you should not have any images. But remember who he is. He is known as the great Arab reformer. He is the one that introduces the Arabic script as the international script for all trade, and in this case, for all theology. Now, also, Hatun, you notice that is the Shahada on the front side. And it has, I think it's 112 on the back
Surah
side.
112.
Which is, he is not begotten, nor does he beget. Who is that confronting?
That's just written against Christian faith.
It's
doesn't have a
against
son.
Jesus Christ, the begotten Son. It's against John 3:16.
Which is very sad.
Well, okay, but can you see what's happening? You introduce the Shahada, so you attack the prophet and the God of Christianity on one side, and you introduce your alternative on the other side.
So you introduce yourself with your creed, simply Shahada. Allah and Muhammad equal. Allah is God and Muhammad is his messenger, yet they are equal. On the other side, you just attack the core Christian doctrine that God doesn't have a son.
See, Muhammad's name is not found in any Arab coins or any Arab script until this time. It is introduced, the first time we see Muhammad's name is introduced on the Dome of the Rock. On the inscriptions, on the inner ambulatories. That's the only original part of the Quran that exists today. Because the Dome of the Rock has been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. The only original part are those inscriptions. And there you have the Shahada introduced. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. It's introduced on the Dome of the Rock. It's introduced on the Caliphal Protocol. Yehuda Nevo did his study on this. And he said if you look at all the Caliphal Protocols, these are official documents by the caliphs from Sufyani period up to the Marwanid period. Marwan comes into power in 680. His son Abdul Malik comes in power 685. He's part of the second one of the Marwanid family. You have all these Caliphal Protocol. There's no Shahada. There's no Bismillah. There's no mention of Muslims. There's no mention of Islam. And there's no mention of a Quran.
By Arabs.
And there's no mention of Muhammad. But these are supposed to be the first Muslims. Until 691, he says. And then in 691, suddenly the Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim is introduced, and then the Shahada is introduced. And it's on the protocols, introduced the same year that it's introduced on the Dome of the Rock. Now look at the coins. It's also introduced on the coins. Proving that this is probably Abdul Malik. It is Abdul Malik that introduces the Prophet Muhammad as what? As a competition to who? Jesus.
Christian faith.
Now can you understand why the Dome of the Rock was built in Jerusalem and not up in Damascus? And look where it's built. It sits up on a hill looking down onto the Church of the Sepulchre, which is the center of Christian Byzantine Christianity. Nonetheless, these coins are interesting. Why hasn't the British Museum picked up on any of this?
Oh, well, now, it's good questions for us to ask our Muslim friends. Where is all those Shahada as well as the first reference to Muhammad from the Arabic sources are coming to the world?
So what we're showing here, I hope you people are watching this, the British Museum has just written the classical narrative. They're just following the classical narrative. What we're saying is there's some problems with this classical narrative. You're showing these images and you're not even questioning them. Yet you know, anybody knows, anybody who has followed the classical narrative knows that there are no images permitted in Islam. We're going to see that later. We're going to show you some other things. Well, I decided to do a quick addendum. Hatun, in fact, when I was just talking to her a few minutes ago, asked me why I hadn't done this when we were there at the British Museum. So I'm going to interject it right here, since we're talking about coins and we're talking about the dirham. We have looked at the dirham that was introduced by the Sufyani family in 661. They were the Sufyani family of the Umayyad Caliphate. They were introduced as a replacement for the Sassanid and the Byzantine dinar, so that they could trade with the Byzantines and they could trade with the Sassanians. Now, I'm going to present two problems with this dirham, because if these were only introduced in the world in 661 as coins, that's not in doubt, then we have a problem with the Quran itself. In the Quran, in the story of Joseph, in Surah 12, verse 20, ayah 20 of Surah 12, chapter 12, let me just read what it says. This is Joseph, the story of Joseph, as you well know, and he's being sold to the Egyptians by the brothers, his brothers, and it says in verse 20, and they sold him, the brothers, sold him for a low price, for a few dirham. And the word in Arabic, and it's right there in the Arabic, is darahima. You can see it in the Arabic there. Now, I'm not going to put it up. You can go and look at your own Quran and see that that's there. So this is not just a translation. This is actually the word that is used in the original Arabic. And then it says in parentheses, i.e. for a few silver coins, that these are the coins it's referring to, the dirham. And they were of those who regarded him insignificant. Now, I see two problems with that immediately. Perhaps you can see that as well. First and foremost, let's deal with the historical problem concerning whether there were even coins that existed at the time of Joseph in 1800 BC. And the answer is no. Coins were never used that early. They were first introduced by the Lydians in the 600 BCs. That's about 1200 years later. So you can't have coins in 1800 BC to begin with. And so obviously the question is this an error in the Quran? Well, hold on a minute. Hold on. It could be that Muhammad is just reusing a coin that he would have been relevant for him at that time. So he was using the Arab equivalent to the dinar. So that's why he was using this name, this reference. And then maybe he was trying to contextualize it for his hearers. So that's why he used the word. Perhaps that's all that's going on here. This is contextualization. Got a problem there as well. Perhaps you've seen it. This cannot be contextualization because remember the date that I said that the dirham was introduced. 661. Muhammad died in 632. The Quran therefore was finished in 632. There was no Quran after 632 that could have been added to. You can't add words. You can't add text after 632 according to Islam, according to every Muslim I know. So this would have had to been the word that Muhammad used prior to 632, prior to his death, whenever this was revealed to him. If that is the case, how can he be talking about a coin that is yet to exist? There are no dirhams during his lifetime. They only get introduced another 30 years after he died. Can you see a problem? Maybe you might say maybe he's prophetic. But that proves to me that this is a verse that was added at a much later date when dirhams were quite normal and quick dirhams were now being used right across the Muslim world post 661 AD. So, two problems. There were no coins in 1800 BC, yet this is talking about the dirham counted out, proving that this was a coin. You count out coins. We know that the Lydians introduced coinage in 600 AD, BC, long, 1,200 years after that story of Joseph. So obviously that's a problem. And that possibly if Muhammad had tried to contextualize it, maybe using a coin that existed at his time, and that's obviously not true as well, since these were not invented for another, were not created and sent to the world for another 30 years. Let's see if the same problem is in the Bible. So let's go back to the same story and let's go to Genesis, chapter 37, verse 28. Here you have the brothers selling Joseph to the Midianites. And it says here in verse 28, so when the Midianites merchants came by, his brothers, Joseph's brothers that is, pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. 20 shekels. Is that a coin? And the answer is no, it's not a coin. It's a weighted measure. According to the documentation that we have now got from that period, that's exactly what a slave would cost, 20 shekels in 1800 BC. What's fascinating is shekels are not coins, they are a weighted measure. In this case, it's about 2% of a kilo of silver, and it's a weighted measure that would have been used to buy and sell slaves at that time. So the Bible not only gets the right denomination, it gets the right price, it also gets the right, in this case, currency, which are not coins, because those would not have been introduced until the 600 BCs, another 1,200 years later. Ooh, I love my Bible. We're not even asking the Bible to be that accurate. It just turns out it is that accurate. Whereas this book, using the dirham, it's got the wrong coin at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing with the wrong person. Not with this book. And so I wanted to introduce that because that is an ongoing problem that not only the curators there at the British Museum don't understand, Muslims don't realize just how damaging these historical anachronisms can be. Okay, back then to our time at the British Museum. This is Jay. Over and out. Where you can see, in fact, we're going to show you one artifact.
Can we just move to that one now? So while we're in that topic.
Let's look at this artifact here.
We have seen very, very nice, what would you call that, like mosaic? Not mosaic. Very nice written.
Here it is right here. It's a plaque, whoops. It's a plaque that you...
So you see lovely birds, colors are very beautiful.
It's called the large luster tile. It's a tile. And what's fascinating about it, it is dated to around, well, it's 1300s, 1300 AD, so it's much, much later. But that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in what they have done to the tile. If you look at it, the tile is from Surah 76, Ayah 9. And then it has plants and it has birds. But if you notice, look at the heads of every one of the birds. What's wrong with them, Hatu?
Their body looks very good. I can recognize their legs and their wings, but something happened to their face.
Their heads have been scratched out.
So they didn't have the shredding machine. So
they just took a chip and they chipped it away. That is the problem with imageries, and that's a very difficult, that's a problem for all Muslims today, and even when this tile was made. Yet that is fascinating that no one did this to any of the coins, nor has anybody objected to the coins.
But just on that tile, British Museum tells us the Prophet's hadiths, sayings, compiled a century after his death, provided evidence both in favor of and against figural imaginary. There is a long-standing practice of the decorating mosques with calligraphies, blah, blah, and then it goes on. And then it also tells us what happened to the head of those birds.
Eradicated because this is idolatry. Interestingly, kept in place.
It says, can I read it? However, someone had strong reaction to this later, and at an unspecific date, and chipped off the head of each bird. Someone just didn't like the heads of the birds. They wanted to practice certain part of the hadith, and then they just chipped the head of the birds.
That's only to say that this is obviously a real problem in Islam. Anything to do with idolatry is anathema. And that's why almost everything we're looking at today are scripts. Because the only artistry you have is calligraphy, beautiful calligraphy. Because if you don't have any way of expressing yourself through imagery, you've got to go to the script itself.
Yeah. So, shall we move to the Quran? Because at the entrance of the room also we see very lovely Quran, and then British Museum tells us how the Quran is compiled, and I think probably
let's just show what they say, and you can read it for yourself. This is the classical account again, and notice about halfway down it says the text was standardized under Caliph Uthman between 644 and 656.
Sorry, does it say also Uthman ordered all the written manuscripts to be burned?
No, it doesn't say
that.
It
doesn't say that? Because it seemed to me they just simply went to Sahih Bukhari, copied, took something away and then put it there, but they forgot to put that part
The most damaging things. There are a number of things that are damaging right here. Here's a picture of the Quran that they're describing. This is a much later Quran. It's not really that important as far as its daters and whatnot.
It's 1818, I think.
18, yeah, so it's not really an important Quran. It's what they're saying about it that I think is interesting, because they suggest that the Quran was started with Uthman, and as you notice, they don't talk about the fact that there was an earlier Quran written in 632 to 634 under the auspices of under the authority of Abu Bakr.
Yeah.
They don't mention that was left under the bed of Hafsa for 20 years.
And they're not talking about the sheep came and then eat the Quran. They're not talking about people are complaining they cannot find certain verses. They are not talking about how Uthman ordered Quranic manuscripts to be burned off.
Or that how Aisha had the sheep eat it because it had to do with men being able to suckle the woman's breast in order to be in her presence. Interestingly, none of this is referred to, but that's not important. What I'm interested is, why is it that they just keep this classical account and they don't even question whether or not the Quran came from Uthman? Because what do we know now today? Can the Quran have come from Uthman? From what we know historically.
I think history disagrees with that.
Give me some examples. Why?
Oh, well, first of all, we're supposed to have one perfect Quran from Surah 1 to Surah 114 from the time of Uthman, yet we don't have. We have got Sana manuscripts. It is only a couple of pages. I'm talking about underwritings. It is not the full Quran, and they are dated after Uthman.
Okay, so you're talking the palimpsest of Sana.
Yeah.
Palimpsest means there's
underwritings.
It means written on animal skin. You can wash it off and write over top.
Yeah.
And the bottom part is now bleeding through. After hundreds and hundreds of years, the ink's starting to bleed through. You can actually look at the two scripts. We have 63 verses, 70 manuscript variants just within those 63 verses.
So 63 verses out of 6,236 verses.
And why is it that those 63 have 70 variants with the Quran we have today?
As well, it's not the full Quran.
And what was the date for the upper layer? 705.
Top writing, yes, beginning of 8th century.
705. So the lower layer they're claiming is from the time of Uthman. I would suggest there's no way you can claim that, because you can only claim the date when the animal died.
I have read the article which was talking about it will be late 7th century, not like mid 7th century.
So, and I would agree, it was probably, and I would suggest that probably the underlayer was begun at the time of Abdul Malik, because that corresponds with what we're seeing with the coins, with the Arabic script, and also with the fact that Shahada is introduced at that time.
Even the British Museum give up on the Quran of Muhammad and Quran of Abu Bakr, yet history goes against British Museum and Islamic traditional account regarding the Quran of Uthman.
Now, to be fair, Hatun, I'm not
really
upset.
I'm already very fair.
I'm not, to be fair, I'm not really upset with the British Museum that they put the classical account. That's all they know. I think what you're going to see, and this is for you to write, that now that this new discoveries are coming up, now that their new narrative is starting to be questioned, and now that we're starting to get this material out into the open, I would suggest that the museum in years to come will try to change this story. What do you think?
I don't know. I haven't come across anything in the museum talking about the Jonah was in the tummy of the fish. Bible says so, but British Museum hasn't put anything there, Jane.
But that's not important to the account.
It is important to me.
It is to you. But as far as the idea that Uthman
There's
created...
something biased, Jay. There is something biased in here.
Okay, well,
I know you have a good faith, but there is something is biased.
Let's talk in about 5 years from now. Let's see where we go from that. So that's the Quran. Now we know that the Quran, we're going to see an awful lot more new material that's coming out. Let's go to the next, which is the astrolabe. Is that what I'm looking at?
No, direction of the Qibla.
Okay, let's go on here and explain what this little instrument does. What does it do?
So apparently this is composed, it is there to help Muslims to find the direction of the Qibla. It was very important for Muslims to make sure they exactly pray the right direction.
So Qibla is direction of prayer.
Direction of the prayer, where Muslims do minimum 5 times a day. And apparently they are facing, today they are trying to face towards Kaaba, which is in Mecca. And this is just simply tells us Muslims were trying to focus their Qibla direction.
So here's another example, Hatun, of the classical narrative. They don't even question it. There's no critical assessment. It just says the painted ivory compass indicates the Qibla, the direction of prayer, towards Mecca. Now, no, not even an idea that there were no Qiblas towards Mecca. Up until 706, all the Qiblas were towards Petra. The first dated Qibla towards Mecca is not till 727. We don't have anything earlier than 720. Now, let me put, for those who are listening, when did Muhammad die? 632. When was the Qibla canonized?
624.
624. That's in
Surah 2,
Surah 2, ayah 145 to 149 has that he took the Qibla change from Jerusalem back down to the Great Mosque. So most Muslims would say that could be 621 or that could be 624. Nonetheless, in the 620s, let's just put in the 620s. So every mosque should be facing
To Mecca.
Mecca from the 620s on, right? Latest date, 624. And that means every mosque, because what mosque existed prior to 624? Muhammad hadn't left yet Mecca.
Oh, well,
I'm sorry, he had gone to Mecca in 622, but there really were no campaigns outside of Mecca, the Hijaz,
Medina.
that central area, until really after 627. So from 627, as he starts gaining more land, and as he has these 39 battle campaigns, and in each place he sets up a little Muslim community, and then the mosque would be set up. So we're saying that every Qibla, every mosque should be facing Mecca from 624 on.
And Dan Gibson put a book together about this, and sadly, I think he will be very disappointed by British Museum. Since while British Museum identifies as a direction of the prayer, why it is Mecca, versus, as Jay said, from the 1st century of Hijrah, sadly, we cannot put that together.
It's fascinating that the British Museum, on the other side of the room, is what you see here. It's the Qibla indicator. And it's going on about how great that they are and how accurate they were at the ability to find the Qibla, the direction of prayer. What Dan Gibson has found is just the opposite. The earliest Qiblas are by far the most accurate, which had nothing to do with Mecca.
It's all towards Petra.
There are four Qiblas, are there not?
Yeah.
The first Qibla goes from up to 706, and that's the Qibla that goes to Petra. Where is Petra?
In Jordan.
In Jordan.
Which is very, very far and different direction from Mecca.
How many miles? About 600 miles.
I don't know. Okay. I'll
600
take
miles
that
further
number.
north. So 600 miles further north. So when you're looking at a Qibla from many different countries, it does show up when it's completely wrong. So here, David King is really the only one that's really confronted Dan Gibson. And David King is the world authority on the Qibla, was the world authority on the Qibla. But here's the problem, Hatun. He only went to 2 mosques. How can you be an authority on Qiblas in mosques? Qiblas are in mosques.
So did Dan Gibson visited almost all mosques?
He visited every one of the mosques. So he visited over 65 mosques. And he used what they call ASTER. Now the ASTER satellite, let me get it right. It's Advanced Thermal Emission and Reflection Radiometer. That's a big phrase.
Big word.
Created by the Japanese. So it is the most accurate. It takes 260,000 pictures every 2 days within 96 feet of each other.
Okay.
The whole world.
So while Dan Gibson puts together the material that early Qiblas are facing to Petra, first century of Islam, British Museum simply steps in and then tells us, actually, no, they are facing, Qiblas were facing to Mecca, as well as gives us the materials, how they were able to
Be so accurate.
yeah.
Dan Gibson completely refutes that. In fact, Dan Gibson said, and you'll see, I'll put this graph up there as to which are the most accurate. And you will find there were 4 Qiblas. There was what we call the Petrin Qibla, which is the Qibla number 1, up to 706. That is introduced, then another one introduced 706 called the in-between Qibla, which is the most accurate, but it's not facing anywhere.
Right.
There's nothing there. There's no rock. There's no just sand. What is it facing? Well, we now know this is a political statement. And that's why it's fascinating that Qibla is the most accurate by Al-Hajjaj. It's all the Qiblas of all the mosques that were built by Al-Hajjaj. And he was, again, he was rebelling against the Umayyads. He was rebelling against Abd al-Malik. And that's why you can see this a political statement to nowhere at all. Yet it's more accurate. It's with less than 1 degree of accuracy. However, the Meccans, which are the Abbasids, only introduced theirs in 727. They are the least accurate. Then we get to what we call the parallel Qiblas, which are in North Africa. There's another political statement. They don't want to give their ascendancy, they don't want to give their allegiance to either the Petrins or the Meccans, the Umayyads or the Abbasids, because this is a political battle. Who's going to win out? Is it going to be the Umayyads or the Abbasids going to win out? So therefore, they're building their mosques parallel, waiting to see who's going to win out, hedging their bets, which is pretty smart. So why didn't the British Museum know this? Why didn't the British Museum know that these are all political statements? And why didn't the British Museum know that there's a whole multiplicity, 4 different groups of Qiblas that exist up until 822. And by 822, all the Qiblas are towards Mecca. They're suggesting that this happened from the very beginning.
Oh, well, I did express my emotions to the British Museum with the previous video, which I also sent it to the British Museum. And then when this video goes up, we will express our emotions, and then we see what is their historical comeback to that one.
Again, I think this narrative is going to change. The classical narrative is being attacked, being assailed. You have someone like David King who just got all emotional against Dan Gibson. Said, you don't know what you're talking about. Dan Gibson just said, listen, David, the only problem I have with what you're doing is you're just taking what 9th century Muslims told you. You're reading material from the 9th and 10th
Instead
century.
Of going
you're
and
not
checking it.
actually going to the physical place. I went to the physical place and I took the measurements. Why didn't you do that? Shame. He didn't say shame on you. I'm saying shame on him. So I think this is something that we're going to see. Again, I'm very optimistic. I would say in 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a different narrative, even in the British Museum.
Oh, well, it's coming out, so you have too much hope. And then what else we saw at the British Museum? So also as we were walking around, we saw trade way. How do you call
Trade
that?
route.
Yeah, trade route, where half people were passing around their goods. What did you think about that, Jay?
Again, this is the classical account once again. I mean, it's just, I in some ways, I feel...
Nothing personal to British Museum or Islamic tradition. It's just we simply ask general questions about the history.
The trade route, look at this map that they put up there. Take a look at that map, and what do you see? You have Kana, which is Aden, up to Timna, and then from there, actually these are from Aden up to Najran to Sana, and then you go up to you go up to Mecca, and then you go up to Medina, which is Yathrib before that. And you notice it notes, it doesn't even question, it just notes that this is on the trade route, right?
Yeah.
Anybody looking at that saying, oh, okay, so Mecca's on the trade route. If you look carefully, you can see that there's a little bit of a jog down to Mecca, then back up to Medina, all right?
Yes.
What they don't show you is, this is what Patricia Krona found. Dr. Patricia Krona, who reads and writes 15 languages, she noticed that there's something wrong with this. Because where that jog is, if you look where that line's, that follows what they call the Western Plateau in Arabia. And Mecca is not on that plateau. It's down off the plateau a good 1,000 meters, this is the trade route. This is what they call the trade route theory. They used to, all the trade would come from the western coast of India there, follow that Black Arrow, up through the Persian Gulf, and then it would go over to the Mediterranean world, that way, right? That is known as where all the trade went. However,
so Turkey is there. So in here you've got Jordan, Jerusalem, Iraq part of the world.
Yeah. Then two great empires started battling each other. The Byzantine Empire started battling with the Sassanid Empire. Bam, bam, bam. From the 5th century, 6th century, up until the 7th century, which shut down that trade. They couldn't go that route anymore, right? So therefore, according to Montgomery Watt, who is the great Orientalist, he said they had to shift the trade this direction here, across the Arabian Sea, over to Aden, okay? And then from there, they went right across the Western Plateau up to Gaza in the north. That was what we call the trade route theory. And that is what we've been taught. That's the classical account. It's still being taught in all the schools today. There's a problem, however. Patricia Krona noticed that if you're going up from Aden, you go up here to Taif, take a look at where then from Taif, you go down to Mecca. You have to go down off the plateau, then come back up to Yathrib, and then from there on up to Gaza in the north. Are you following that?
Yeah.
Following that? It's off the it's off the plateau. You can see it's a jog down, then a jog back up. 1,000 meters down and 1,000 meters up. So she decided to do some research. She wrote a whole book on this in 1987 called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. And what she found is that the trade did not go to Aden at all for one very good reason. There's a waterway. It did not stop at Aden. It went this way, right up through the waterway. And Agilis, this city here, was in charge of all the trade. It went right up the waterway. The reason is very simple. You send any trade by water, it's much cheaper than sending it by land.
Yep.
50 miles by land would cost the same amount as 1,250 miles by sea. That's why all of our trade goes by sea, even today in the 21st century. And so she said this whole trade route theory is completely been debunked. She debunked it in one book. Now here in the
What
British
about
Museum,
British Museum then?
They
They
still
haven't
can-
read the book yet?
they haven't even read the book, and she had this out in 1987. They haven't even acknowledged that there is a problem with Mecca. There is a problem with the trade route. They just put it up there because that's the classical account. So can you see, in these kind of things, this would have been changed long ago if this had been Christianity or anything to do with the West or anything to do with European history. They would have changed it when new evidence came to light.
Yep.
They haven't even begun to change this. Even though Dr. Patricia Krona, head of department at Oxford University, when she wrote this book, got a death threat for writing this book, had to move to Cambridge University, was head of department there, then moved to Princeton University in the United States. Head of department at Princeton University, probably considered to be the greatest scholar of our generation, reads and writes 15 languages. They're not at all taking what she has found and others have found as a result of this trade route critique.
Oh, well, as I said, this video will go to the British Museum as well. Hopefully, we will see some changings. So, after that, I remember we passed through one of the window, which was using the phrase called dhimmis.
Yeah, now look at this church here. This church that they have.
First, just tell me what is dhimmis,
Dhimmi
and then
means protected.
protected. Okay, so I heard that phrase before as well.
Dimitude.
Yes.
Well, here's a good case of that, and this is something that's fascinating because the whole idea of protected means that you cannot do anything without, since you're under protection, you're not at all involved in the military or the policing. Therefore, because you're protected, you must be under our jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means that everything that you do must get our permission.
So, according to the British Museum, that Christians were living under the Islam as a dhimmis, and they were practicing their religions freely.
There it is. We're going to put it right up there. Here is the picture of the Mu'allaka Church in Egypt. This is a Coptic church. And they write there, as non-Muslims, the Copts had a special legal status, al-dhimmi, and were allowed to practice their faith freely.
Please remind me that freely means in Islamic tradition and in history.
That means you cannot have You cannot build any church, you cannot repair any church, you can't even repair a toilet unless you get permission from the governor, the Islamic. More than that, you cannot proselytize. You must give 10% of your goods to the an army. If there is any military that comes through your province, you have to put them up and feed them and house them without any recompense. And more than that, whenever you paid your zakat, jizya, and
money of humiliation.
How do you pay it?
You were humiliated. You were bowing down, and then
you have to bow. You have to come on your hands and knees, and then you're hit at the back of the head to show that you were in submission. It was done for humiliation. Why is that not in here? And where's this idea of freely? Show me. Is that freedom?
Were Christians able to sing carol songs during the Christmas on the streets?
No, they're not.
No.
They could not. Could they proselytize? No, they could not.
Were Christians able to wear crosses during the Easter or walk on the roads with the cross?
No, they could not.
They could not. Were Christians and Muslims allowed to use the same road like normal people just pass through?
No, they could not. And in every case, you can see this is not freedom. So why is it they're so glibly right that they had this special status that they were able to practice their faith freely? Absolutely, that's a lie.
It was full humiliation. It was very, very ugly, yet British Museum chose to put the phrase there freely.
Yeah, and no one even questions it. And I think there's the bias, there's the difficulty. It's nice, and as we've noticed, it's nice that they have a room for just Islam, or I should say two rooms. Just
huge
for Islam.
rooms.
Nothing for Christianity. In fact, let's look at something, and while we end off, I'd like to note, you showed me something as we were ending. Because everything you see in the Islamic movement was great architecture, beautiful calligraphy.
Yeah, beautiful plates, beautiful cats, beautiful turtles, beautiful dresses. So you leave the room, if you have no knowledge on Islam, you leave the room, yeah, that was very, very helpful. It was very good. And then you just walk out, and then you shake your head, and then you need to kind of go through the stairs.
The very next room you go out to, and they show you
and
the
then
Crusades.
You turn your head to right, and then what do you see, Jay?
Well, look what they say. The Crusades were a series of Christian military pilgrimages directed against Muslim-controlled territories in the Holy Land.
False. Not only false, very biased. Very biased, very false, very false.
And this is the narrative, this is the other narrative that is rampant all over our educational system. That the only violence that's ever been perpetrated on Muslims have been by Christians in the Crusades. Nowhere is there any suggestion concerning how Islam got its territory. How did people like Abdul Malik, or let's be through, how did Umar, starting with Umar, in 634 to 644.
Start with Muhammad.
Okay, but I'm talking about the Christian church. How did Umar and Uthman and Ali, all the way up through the Sufyani period, up to the Marwanids, by the time Abdul Malik comes to power in 685. So we're talking about from 624 to 685. How did all that land across North Africa, all the way to Andalusia, which would be Spain today, how did that land come under their control?
I know. So what they did was they sent roses, and then they said, would you like to be friends with us? And then those people said, yes, please. We love you to come, take our land, take our homes, kill our husbands, kill all the boys, all those kind of things. And we love to share life with you.
In fact, Hattun, take a look at this right here. This is in the Muslim area. What does it say here? Andalusia, Spain. Although most of what is now Spain and Portugal accepted Muslim rule in the early 700s, resistance continued in parts of the Northwest.
Look, I told you. They said, all we want is your land, your home, everything you have. Give them to me, I'll give you flowers, and then we will become friends. That's what happened.
Where in the world did the Spanish or the Andalusians accept Muslim Spain? where did this notion come from? And that's why this new book, and we're going to put a picture of it up here, this new book that came out a number of years ago, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise.
We talked about it at Speaker's Corner as well.
Has debunked that idea that they open arm. Nobody lets foreigners or barbarians come over and take over their land. And this is a lie. I mean, this is the biggest lie you can see. What's fascinating is that in this case, they showed that Andalusia accepted Muslim rule. But when we look at this, when we go right next door, it shows that the Christians were the ones that did the Crusades.
That was simply Christian response to Islamic conquerance, defense to Islamic conquerance.
There you go.
But
if that's not a bias, I don't know what is.
But as I said, don't lose hope. Still, Lord Jesus is in charge, and one day he's going to come and judge the world.
And I think for those of you who are watching this is important, what Hatun and I are doing. We just came down here. I just didn't even know about these two rooms. Hatun had gone through them.
You're welcome.
And so thank you for bringing me through it. Let me see it, because we need to show that there's another narrative. There's a whole nother story. And we need to make sure that what we say fits the historical record. Listen, we've been as transparent as we can about Christianity. We do not hide our facts. We do not, the Bible, one of the unique things about the Bible is that even in the Old Testament, they talk about the terrible sins of the prophets. No other piece of literature does that. Only the Bible does that. It talks about the inadequacies of the kings, the inadequacies of the great men of God, and the fact that we don't sanitize our material. Like if you look at the British Museum, look at all those artifacts. It was only the great conquest that they ever write down. They never talk about the defeats. We talk about our defeats. And in the same note, if we set the trend to do that, then we hope that the British Museum will do the same. They need to make sure they keep up with the newest research, but they also need to make sure that if they find something that is critical about Islam, they need to write it down. They need to include it in its story and not sanitize and whitewash this history, because it's not a very pleasant history.
Oh, well, Jay, thank you very much for taking your time. I know you are flying tomorrow morning and joining us in this short video. As we said, it is just to put some questions to our mind. There are lots of places in British Museum where we can go and check the items to confirm the reliability of the Christian scripture, yet we fail to do that for the Islam. So we are just trying to keep it all in the same line. If I am being questioned, then I have right to be questioned. Yeah. And if I am defending my faith, Muslims need to defend their faith as well. And there is nothing wrong with that.
Okay. This has been terrific. Thanks for inviting me.
Now we've got to go for lunch.
All right. Bye-bye. This is Jay.